Thälmann was seized by the Nazis shortly after they came to power, as were many other social democratic leaders. In relation to Thälmann, of course, as the leader of the German Communist Party, bore an enormous responsibility for the defeat of the German working class. The Communist Party itself was completely incapable by 1933 of organizing any resistance. Of course, in his biography, Thälmann had been a very militant worker, but he was by no means a competent political leader. He was an instrument of the Stalinist bureaucracy. But I want to say something about his ultimate fate. As you point out, he was murdered by the Nazis either in 1944 or 45. They held him for many years. But it is not widely known or discussed that when Stalin signed the pact with Hitler, he deliberately did not request the release of Thälmann from a concentration camp. The Nazis had assumed that that would be one of the conditions for the signing of the treaty. But Stalin did not seek Thälmann's release. And of course, in that sense, Stalin himself bore direct responsibility for the tragic fate of Thälmann. Yes, Trotsky accepted responsibility for the suppression of the Kronstadt uprising. And I think one has to understand the circumstances under which that occurred. Clearly, it had certain tragic elements to it, but the uprising in Kronstadt posed a direct and quite immediate threat to the survival of the Soviet state. I don't know whether the person who asked the question is familiar with the geography of Leningrad. Kronstadt occupied an absolutely critical strategic position off the shore of Petersburg, Leningrad, and had the uprising against the Bolshevik regime been successful, the British Navy would have occupied Kronstadt, and that would have been a devastating blow to the Soviet Republic. This is a well-known historical fact. So Trotsky accepted responsibility for what occurred. It was a political and military necessity. The uprising occurred in the midst of a civil war. The regime was fighting to defend itself against counter-revolution. It's a very important question. Let me first state again, as I did in my remarks, the solidarity of the International Committee with Ercan. We will continue to campaign for his release from prison. This is a campaign that we are conducting internationally. And so I hope that in the future, when the museum opens, and I'm sure that will one day take place, that we will be able to celebrate the opening of the museum together with Mayor Ercan. And if you have an opportunity to see Ercan, please convey to him my personal greetings and strong support for his liberation from his unjust imprisonment. In response to your question, I think, in fact, if you examine the international situation and the development of the class struggle, you will see that there is, in fact, a growing radicalization of the working class. In the last 2 years, there has been a substantial increase in strike activity, mass demonstrations, and here in the United States, it is increasingly evident that the working class is being radicalized by the deterioration in the conditions of life, inflation, the assault on living standards, and I must add, a very deep and growing opposition to the war in Iran. This is not a war which has the support of the broad mass of the working class. Quite the opposite. Objective conditions is radicalizing the working class all over the world. And you must understand that the working class is a global force vastly more powerful than it was even 30 or 40 years ago. Clearly, the dissolution of the Soviet Union by the Stalinist regime, as well as the reintroduction of capitalism into China, created a tremendous amount of confusion and disorientation. But after 35 years, that disorientation is giving way to growing anger and militancy. And so the major question today is not whether or not the working class will fight. The working class is going to fight. It's going to fight all over the world, in the United States, throughout Europe, in Asia, in Turkey. But the working class needs political leadership. And the great challenge of our epoch is the rebuilding of a genuine revolutionary Marxist movement. And that is what the International Committee of the Fourth International has set as its fundamental task. All the political events of the past century, and of course the most recent period, have vindicated the analysis of the Trotskyist movement. The great problems of our age will not be solved by bourgeois national movements. They're not going to be solved by guerrilla organizations. It will only be solved by the working class, unified on an international scale on the basis of a revolutionary socialist program. And at the heart of that program is internationalism, it is the expropriation of the bourgeoisie, and it is the liquidation of the entire national state system. That is the only viable solution. And if you think that is very difficult to accomplish, of course it is. But revolutions are not easy to accomplish. Revolutions occur, and they occur because there are big, difficult, historical problems to be solved. These are not easy problems. These are huge problems. And that's why revolutions take place. And the coming revolution will be a working class revolution. And it will be a revolution which unites the working class, as Trotsky had foreseen, all over the world. And that's our strategy. We don't have simply a national strategy. We have a global strategy. And we fight within each country, whether it's in the United States or in Germany or in Turkey. We fight for the implementation of that international strategy. And we are convinced that that will prove to be successful. But you have to fight for it. I can explain our policy, but of course, the success of that policy depends upon its acceptance by the working class, and we have to work for that. We have to convince workers, and that means your direct involvement in the political struggle. If I can speak frankly, it's easy to complain about how difficult things are. but the world has never been changed by simply complaining. It's changed by people intervening in the historical process and taking up the fight. That's what we have to do. As far as one last point, as I said in my remarks, in January 1917, Trotsky was in New York, Lenin was in Switzerland. The revolution exploded. They were successful because they had prepared theoretically and politically. So I think we have to learn from that historical experience. As a matter of fact, there has been an enormous amount of new information and material on this very issue, and based on archives which were previously not available. In fact, the left opposition was a very powerful force within the Soviet Union. It had enormous support among broad sections of workers, among student youth, within significant layers of the intelligentsia, and the Soviet bureaucracy led by Stalin was terrified of the left opposition. That is why they had to rely increasingly on repression, on expulsions, physical violence. The left opposition was not a marginal force, and indeed Trotsky himself, despite all the persecution and all the lies, still enjoyed enormous, I think popularity is too small a word. Trotsky retained immense political authority among the advanced workers within the Soviet Union. He had led the Red Army. He was seen as next to Lenin, the principal leader of the October Revolution. And no person had played so decisive a role in the defeat of the counter-revolution as Trotsky. And so he retained enormous support. That's why the bureaucracy exiled him first to Alma-Ata and then sent him out of the Soviet Union. They were seeking to break the very powerful connection that Trotsky retained with the working class, with the best sections of the intelligentsia, and certainly among the youth. I just want to conclude on this point. 2 days from today, 3 days from today, August 19th will mark the 90th anniversary of the beginning of the first Moscow trial. Stalin had been unable to suppress the still considerable influence of Trotsky and his supporters within the Soviet Union. And that's why in 1936, he concluded that the only alternative left to him was wholesale mass murder, which is what began in 1936. Between 1936 and 1939, under Stalin's leadership, hundreds of thousands of dedicated Marxist revolutionaries, communists, were murdered systematically in the USSR. The lies upon which the Moscow trials were based were comprehensively exposed by Trotsky. All of those, the first trial included many of the most significant leaders of the October Revolution, such as Zinoviev, Kamenev, Smirnov, Rakovsky, and others. And it is nothing less than criminal that even to this day, members of leaders of the existing communist parties, Maoist groups, and other radical tendencies still support and propagate the lies upon which the mass murder of large sections of the Soviet Marxist working class and intelligentsia was murdered. Many of the historical problems we face, many of the contemporary political problems we face, are a consequence of those crimes. Crimes of that magnitude have long-lasting impact. And so the restoration of historical truth, the exposure of the lies of the Moscow trials, the falsification of history, which did such damage to the political consciousness of the working class. Even to this day, the fight for historical truth is of immense importance. But to sum up, yes, the Stalinist regime was terrified of Trotsky, of Trotskyism, and that is why it employed such violent methods to destroy it. But here we are, 90 years later, and the historical stature of Trotsky remains a powerful factor in political history, in the present situation. And I'm convinced that when we say that Trotskyism is the Marxism of the 21st century, that means that Trotskyism, which contains within it all the political lessons of a century of struggle, will form the foundations for the renewed political education of the working class and the coming social revolution. So finally, comrades, I want to thank the Socialist Equality Party in Turkey, and also the Adelad community for making this meeting possible. As I said in my remarks, your annual commemoration of Trotsky's presence in Prinkipo, Büyükada, is acquiring ever greater international recognition. And I look forward to the day in which the Trotsky Villa will be rebuilt and will become a general center of political, cultural enlightenment, historical enlightenment. So thank you very much for inviting me, and please accept my revolutionary greetings, and let us commit ourselves to the fight for socialism. Thank you very much, comrades.